Welcome to Resilient Minds 365, where we discuss the resilient stories of entrepreneurs, professionals, and students with mental illnesses to encourage you to strive, thrive, and live in abundance. I'm your host, Cleone Crawford. Welcome to Resilient Minds 365, where we discuss the resilient stories of entrepreneurs, professionals, and students with mental illnesses to encourage you to strive, thrive, and live in abundance. I'm your host, Cleone Crawford. Well, guys, we are back and we have a great guest with us today. We have Charlotte Crober. Who is Charlotte Crober? Well, she has always loved French and was inspired to learn it thanks to her polyglot granddad who juggled 5 languages like a pro. With 5 years of experience working with youth and adults who are learning languages, she's the super bilingual you never knew you needed. With that said, I now present to you Charlotte Crober. So, Charlotte, tell us a bit more about yourself. How did you get started? What are you doing now? Yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
I got started, the real beginning, I guess, well, we'll keep it brief. So we'll start with university, where I accidentally applied for a bilingual undergraduate program without really realizing it. So I'm from Ontario originally. I live in Quebec now, but in Ontario, you get 3 applications when you apply to university through OUAC. So I wanted to go to the University of Toronto. So the other schools that I applied to, I didn't pay too close attention. And York University actually has a bilingual campus. I applied to the bilingual campus as my second choice and received an offer letter and was like, oh, well, that's nice. And then I clicked on it and I was like, it's in French. The French was first. I was like,
Mm.
wow, why? And it turned out to be a fully bilingual undergraduate program in sociology. Um, the campus was smaller. It was a lot cuter. We studied in like a 1920s mansion for some of our classes. So for me, it seemed obvious that I wouldn't go to the big fancy school and that I would rather go to the smaller school that actually would give me a real advantage when I graduated by speaking French, or so I thought. Um, so I studied all through school. It was actually really hard. I struggled a lot with the material, but I did not give up, and I came close to it, but I did not give up.
Mm.
And but then at the end, I found that I wasn't super able to actually communicate in French. Like I would meet people and they would be like bonjour, and I was like, ooh. So I decided, well, okay, this has to be fixed because I would apply for jobs. They would call me back being like, oh, you're bilingual, you have a bilingual degree. And I was like, I'm bilinguish. Like, so I decided to go to Quebec. And I studied in Quebec, studied at a French immersion school, through the Explore program. And then later decided, well, that was too much fun. I'm gonna go for 9 months. And I did Odyssey, which is their other program, where you get paid to live in a francophone community and you work. So that's how I ended up being a language teacher. My job was a language assistant at a CEGEP, which is like a college in the rest of Canada. Um, and so that's how I ended up speaking French, living in Quebec, and working in languages.
Wonderful, wonderful, exciting. So now are you looking, you're starting your own business as I guess, what?
That's a good question. So I'm doing a few things. So, but first, my first plan, I decided to start a business was that while I was at the CGEP, I worked there for 3 years and we did speaking practices with the students, usually 4 times per session. And there's lots of students, so I was very busy. And so eventually I kind of got tired of doing the same activities over and over because the teachers would provide me with like, oh, here's our curriculum, here are some related discussion questions that I want you to bring up. Got tired of those, so I decided. Well, I asked. I was like, well, "Could we do something different? Could we maybe play some board games, and I could adapt them and maybe see how that would work. And they were like, yeah, like that would be a good idea. Like, it would be nice to have some game-based learning and interaction. So I bought a bunch of board games just from like the secondhand shop. And I adapted them and I found some games even at the CJEP. Depending on the level, I would change the game rules or I'd make a whole new game using the different pieces. And eventually I came to the conclusion that I really wanted a specific game to be made, and I couldn't, like, there was no such thing. And so I thought that it would be really nice to try to make it. So,
Cool.
yeah, and I was really lucky because I actually applied for a couple of grants and I got 2 grants. So I was able to do some branding and some prototyping of my games and then even testing and market research. So
Mhm.
yeah, that was awesome. So I have like 5 prototypes and a brand identity. So that's cool. And in the future I'd like to sell the games to not only schools but also to individuals. I would say it's kind of like Duolingo, but for spoken English. We're starting with English now, and I would love to do French later.
Mhm.
Um, because it's a game that makes you speak, whereas a lot of the applications that you have, the free ones, they don't actually have you speaking in a natural way. Like for example, there's Speechling, but Speechling just has you repeat things and it's focusing on pronunciation. Whereas natural, spontaneous language, it's hard to practice that outside of an immersion context. You kind of People think, oh, you really have to go to a different country. And I wanted to maybe make immersion seem more accessible, especially to students who live outside of Montreal.
Cool. Sounds exciting. Sounds exciting. Cool. So now that we know a bit about you and how you got started and everything, we are going to switch the interview to the mental health part of this interview. So, what is your mental health diagnosis and when were you diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed with I actually have OCD, like sort of a lighter OCD. It's not super intense, but I was diagnosed in 2016 or something, 2017. Um, and it just leads to like anxiety about random situations.
Mhm.
And so that's why the game that I created actually focuses on reducing anxiety. Because I know what that feels like when you're just like, oh my gosh, especially like the perfectionism part of things. And even without OCD, I think that speaking, much less speaking in another language, really makes you anxious. They're just like, oh, like how's this gonna go? Like, have I made a fool of myself? And the answer is possibly yes, but also that maybe it doesn't matter.
Right.
So the game is, I guess, was made for people who are anxious, by a person who is also anxious.
Cool. Interesting. 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 Okay, so tell us a bit more about your mental health story of resilience. What did you have to go through? How did you bounce forward from being someone who has OCD and is anxious to someone who is a bit more, I guess, coping with your illnesses.
I think the main thing, well, I think as soon as I understood that it was OCD, it was so much easier to just understand it and to deal with because you're like, well, okay, I think this is actually my like OCD. It's not really the case that if I do this, then this thing will happen, like what do they call them? The intrusive thoughts, where they're just like, yeah, like if you step on the sidewalk crack, then a tree will fall on you. You're like, no, that's not logical. Like as soon as you know that your mind is kind of playing tricks on you, it's a lot easier to sort of shut it down. So for me,
Mm.
the first step was getting diagnosed, and well, the first step was actually just going to my doctor and saying, I think I'm really anxious about things that don't make sense. And it was that realization that these things didn't make sense that kind of propulsed me to go have a consultation.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and then like I guess like DBT and CBT techniques. I didn't do a whole lot of therapy just because as soon as I figured out what was going on, I was able to put those um, systems into place to be able to reframe my thoughts and like to understand that really this isn't like actually such a big deal. And even though it feels that way, it's hard because you're like, oh, I don't want to like invalidate my own feelings, but at the same time, like this is not real. So how do you deal with that? And so yeah, in recent years it's been a lot better just because I can immediately be like, no, that's not what we're doing today. Whereas
Right.
before it was like, I don't know, why are we doing this today? I guess this is what we're doing. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So my next question is, what did you have to do to overcome or bounce back from your low points? List all the resources that were applicable.
Okay. All the resources. I think a lot of the resources for me, so I was studying when I was diagnosed, and I tried to access my university's mental health supports, but it was sort of difficult to actually get appointments, and the appointments weren't very long. So ultimately, I kind of gave that up, and instead, sort of, I guess, talked with my friends a lot about what I was feeling because when you're feeling something like, oh, like if I step on a sidewalk crack, a tree's gonna fall on me. It's not very logical, so you might not want to mention it to your friends. You're like, oh, like are they gonna think I'm crazy? But I think one thing that I started doing was saying like, "Oh, like, I just have this, like, fear right now that this thing is gonna happen because of this thing," and then a friend would be like, who knows the situation, would be like, "I know if you're feeling like this, but just so you know, just to bring you back into reality here, like, I don't think that's gonna happen because of these very concrete reasons." And these are things that I could say to myself, but it's nice to have someone else, say that to you, so that helps me a lot. Um, and it's gotten to the point where I don't even talk about it very much. Like, I think a lot of my friends that I have, made more recently, they're like, "Whoa, like, I didn't know you had OCD." Um, and so I think that's a technique that really worked for me is just talk it through.
Mhm.
And it's too bad that therapy is kind of hard to access because it would have been good to do it in therapy, but, good friends are also a great resource, I think. What else have I used? I think like the DBT and CBT workbooks that you can find sometimes, I've done quite a lot of those, especially when I was first diagnosed, and that helped so much actually.
Yeah.
So I really used those free resources, um, and yeah, like I guess not discounting like what you can do if you can access therapy. I know it's the gold standard, but like it just wasn't the case for me. Um, yeah. I did also try, like, medication, but didn't love the results, so, I decided and I was having good enough results just by doing, like, DBT workbooks and CBT workbooks and things like that, so, and talking to my friends. So that's what I decided to do.
Okay, perfect, perfect. And what are three things you wish you had available when you were at your lowest point?
Definitely, therapy, like, accessible therapy that is affordable. Because I was a student and I was, like, looking at the price, even, like, the cheaper ones, I was like, "That's still pretty expensive, for my budget," and it is, like, a health concern, so I was yeah, and there's, of course, like, the OHIP covered therapy that I could have theoretically had access to, but I was on the waiting list for, like, 100 years, and now I don't even live in Ontario anymore, so that's over. Um, yeah, I in some ways I feel like I guess I was just lucky to have had a really good support network, and it's kind of scary to think about what would have happened if I didn't. Not that it would have been necessarily awful, but like I would be much less happy and much less fulfilled and much less able to start a business, which is a like it's very anxiety inducing at times. You know, you're making big decisions and you're the one who's responsible, you're the one who's taking the risk. So if you have these intrusive thoughts like, oh, if I do this, then this happens, and you can't understand those things as being intrusive thoughts, I feel like that would be really hard. Um, some other things that I wish I had available. I think more understanding, like because a lot of my friends were generally really, really supportive, but occasionally there would be someone who just didn't get it. They're like, "Why would you think that? Like, oh, like you need help or whatever. Like you need as I
Yes.
think it's true that it's a little unusual, but it's not such a huge stigma. It shouldn't be such a huge stigma. Like
Right.
OCD is such a it's just such a like a I don't want to say harmless because it obviously is harmful, but it's not people make a big deal of it, I find. And it's like, yeah, I know that this thing that makes no sense to you, I think this or I'm having this occur in my brain, not really thinking it. Um because I know it's not real. But I guess this can kind of scare people in some way, or they don't understand it. So I wish that people understood it more and didn't think it was, yeah, or like even just like a joke. Sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I'm really OCD about this. It's like you don't get it, like you don't. That actually bothers me a lot less than people who think it's like a huge deal. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. The next question I have for you is, so what words of hope would you give to our listeners? What would you tell somebody with OCD and anxiety?
I would say, depending on how it would, because it's such a wide spectrum of like, because mine, I mentioned it was pretty mild, in the sense that I was able to manage it sort of just by doing workbooks and like reframing my thoughts and talking to my friends. So it would be easy for me to say like, oh yeah, it'll work out fine, don't worry. Um, at the same time, using resources that you have available to you, like as much as you can, I think is really worthwhile. Because even, yeah, there's resources on the internet. You have to be kind of careful with those, but especially if they come from a credible source. And I guess finding, for me as well, the thing that helped me the most was that I used to live in Toronto, and I used to take these really long walks, and that was something that I did that would really just get me out of my head and into my body. Um,
Mhm.
and since then, I've actually moved to rural Quebec, so now I live pretty much in a forest, and I can do lots of activities. Like I can go cycling or rock climbing or something like that, and things like that really help me to just. It's like I have an actual thing to be afraid of right now. Like in rock climbing, you're like, if like I won't die if I fall, but I might scrape my knee. So that really makes me think about the actual real things that physical things. I find that that really helps. So actually, my main outlet, I would say, is sports. And since I was diagnosed, this is a thing I forgot to mention actually, that's really important. Since I was diagnosed, I started becoming a lot more active. I did a lot more exercise. I move a lot more. I'm like my whole actual hobbies changed, and I've become really, really about exercise and sports, just because I noticed how much it made me feel different and how much better it made me feel. And that started just by I decided that I would bike to work instead of taking the subway. And it started from there, and then that's how it kind of grew into me doing like 3-day backpacking trips or like or bike packing trips or whatever. So it starts there, and it's a slippery slope cycling, I think. But other sports too, like even cross country skiing. That's like something that really gets me into my body.
Love that. Love that. Love that. All right. So now we're going to take a little switch in the interview again. So this time, as you can see on to the right of, well, to the left of me or to the right of me. Yeah, to the right of me, you'll see some books where it says the music of my life. Basically, those books are about my journey with mental health and bipolar disorder. So, and music and my love for music. So my question to you is, what type of music do you like?
I feel like so my dad's a musician. I always grew up listening to music, so I like have a very developed music taste, which I don't talk about as often as I used to when I was like a kid, for example. I was always on about it. Um, but for me, I do like jazz a lot just because I like that there's no lyrics. Usually, I actually prefer jazz without lyrics. Vocal jazz, I'm not quite as into. But I also love anything that's sort of local, something that people around me are doing, where like the lyrics maybe reference a place that I know, or just like I don't know, like a situation that I'm aware of, or something, or yeah, I guess that I can relate to with my lifestyle. That I like a lot. Um, and anything kind of funky. Like I like weird music from the 70s, I think. That's kind of what I
That's
would say.
cool. I love the 70s. Awesome. So, if you were to think of a song that best describes your journey, what would it be and why?
So the song that I wrote in there is actually a French song, of course. So I I said fille de personne deux. So no one's daughter is what it translates to, which is not true. I have parents. But I like the chorus. maybe I should bring it up here and I can translate it for you because I like the message. It's like a song that I started listening to when I
Mhm.
was in Quebec learning French. And I remember understanding the lyrics for the first time and being like, yeah, like that is so me right now. Because for me, speaking or learning French was a really big goal that I had in my life, and being really bilingual was something I really wanted to do. And I was like lacking the clarity on how to do it. And suddenly it all came. I was like, this is, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and I'm going to be able to achieve this goal. So this, where is it? So the chorus is, I've come to tell you that you can change. I've seen a future of uh, women who are free, where you wore leather and your head was shaved, and then it says, "J'ai vu ton avenir." Is like, I've seen your future. So it's like not too relevant
Mm.
for me because it's actually a song about based on a novel where a woman in the 60s or something like that, like she is, I guess, discovering her freedom with like the women's rights movement. So not super relevant for me living like and I'm not wearing leather with a shaved head, but it's like oh, like, yeah, I see my future where like I'm more free to do what I want and I don't have to worry about these, heavy
Mhm.
things anymore. Like I guess I've managed to deal with my mental health issues, and there's part of my life, but I'm it's not as heavy anymore. So I
Mhm.
guess that was what that meant for me. And also feeling like things were possible for me, like, oh, I could really learn French and just move to Quebec,
Amazing.
which was something that seemed impossible at the time, actually.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I understand. I understand. Okay, that's awesome. So, Charlotte, how can we stay in touch with you and what are your social media handles?
So you could go on my Instagram. Let's see, it is. Had that ready. I just want to make sure I get it right because it's the word game one. Um, so it is Les Éditions Plume, or in English, it's like les is like the plural. Les Éditions Plume means Plume Publishing. You can write it in English as well, but Lesitions, and then Plume is Plume.
Say that
Um,
again. Can you spell that again?
Les,
Uh-huh.
and then a space, Editions,
Ttions.
and then Plume is Plume. So it means literally you could translate it as the Plume Editions, but it just means
Okay.
publishing.
Cool, cool, cool. And so basically that's how people can reach you is on Les Editions Plume.
Hmm.
Perfect. On
Exactly.
Instagram, right?
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, with that said, thank you very much, Charlotte, for coming on our show and being a guest and sharing your story. It was very cool. I really appreciate you sharing, talking about anxiety and OCD and how you overcame. And yeah, thanks again.
Thank
So,
you so much.
no worries. So, to all you resilient minds out there, until next time, please subscribe to us on all our platforms and don't forget to rate the show and leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Also, join the community of resilient minds and sign up for our monthly newsletter at onlycleone.com. Be sure to grab a copy of my book, The Music of My Life, on all Amazon marketplaces to get to know me better. If you can think of one person that will receive value from today's show or connect with Charlotte's testimonial, please share it with them. Feel free to take a screenshot of this week's episode of the podcast and tag us on Instagram. You can tag myself at Only Cleone or Resilient Minds 365 and today's guest at Les Editions Plume. And remember, mental health is not a death sentence. Despite your illness, you can strive, thrive, and live a life of abundance. Until next time, I'm Cleone Crawford, and I'm signing off.